Ladies and gentlemen, let us begin the session. Acupuncture and EBM 2. For each presentation, 15 minutes for presentation and 5 minutes for Q&A time are provided. Speakers may check the time by the color of the light of the timekeeper on the podium. The session chairs will be Dr. Liu Jie and Mr. Tomokazu Kikuchi.
Good morning. Now we will start the first speech. It is Lefeber from the United States, and he will give us a speech about the mind-body connection measurement. Okay, please.
Okay, very good. Arigato. Konnichiwa, everyone. Gozaimasu, and welcome. If you didn't get to check out the meditation this morning, it was very nice. Before we start, we can all take a deep breath and come to the present moment together. We can focus our energy and chi. So, I'm Donald Lefeber. I'm a licensed acupuncturist and also research scientist from Houston, Texas. And I have some very exciting research to share about investigations regarding the biomechanisms of acupuncture associated with the fine motor control. And this may yield insights into understanding of the effectiveness of acupuncture. I work for a couple of integrative medicine programs in Houston, and right now we're focusing on the pain management. And so, as healthcare is moving towards a model of integrative medicine, medicine is looking for a better understanding of the complex nature of the human body and person. I believe that acupuncture and Oriental medicine will help provide a roadmap for the advancement in this new paradigm of medicine practice on both the micro and the macro level. We've already seen this application of ancient knowledge and conventional medical knowledge with medical bilingualism. Some of you may know that in 2015, one of the Nobel Prize winners for physiology and medicine was a Chinese herbal researcher named Yo-Yo Tu. And she was able to discover the specific substance artemisinin, which is used now to inhibit the malaria parasite. And all of this was derived from the Chinese herb Qinghaosu, and from the ancient text that describes helping with some of the symptoms. And so, likely other knowledge from the science of acupuncture will yield a breadth of understanding. The science of integrative medicine has also established theories such as qi, human energy field, the mind-body connection through various sciences. And investigating the science of acupuncture is important because with a close collaboration with Western medicine, it will be beneficial for improving the standards of practice for acupuncture, which is ever important. And as the president of the WAFAS mentioned, it's important that we keep a balance between the traditions and along with the future innovation that we see with the practice. And so one of the challenges for acupuncture research is the search for a mechanism. Many have heard about placebo effects, and the understanding of efficacy of acupuncture and its mechanisms. There's two aspects: specific and non-specific effects, which are the aspect that's referred to as placebo effect. And so some of the placebo effects are the practitioner intention and patient interaction, the Chinese medicine diagnostic procedures such as doing the pulse, looking at the tongue, and even when we describe health evaluation and counseling. And lastly, also the component involving the needling. All of these can represent aspects of the placebo effect, which make it hard to determine effectiveness and efficacy objectively. But as many say in the practice of acupuncture, is that all of these elements actually could play a part in the efficacy of acupuncture, since it is a form of energy medicine. And so Here's a list of investigated biomechanisms of acupuncture. This is not exhaustive, but the point is that it's a complex medical practice, and there have been efforts to investigate the matter. Neural components have been confirmed with scans with the functional MRI to see what kind of brain activity is engaged with acupuncture for various treatments. There's been investigations with the true points and meridians through such as the nuclear dye test, and particularly have been investigated are the stomach and gallbladder channel. What also makes it difficult for examining the biomechanisms, as we've learned a lot this weekend, is the differences in the approach and practice of acupuncture. The Japanese styles can be very superficial and also non-invasive needling, and from the Chinese approach, it's more invasive, so that presents some complications. And then there's also been, in the field of biophysics, a lot of investigation and substantiation of different mechanisms within that field. And lastly, an example is there's been a lot of hormonal evidence, such as the release of endorphins. And my investigation involved fine motor control as an instrument for measuring effectiveness of potential mechanisms with acupuncture. Fine motor control is the coordination of the muscles, the bones, the nerves, which produce the small, precise movements, such as in our hands. And thus, with acupuncture, if we're truly improving the flow of the qi and the blood, we would expect that there would be some changes in the fine motor control. The testing, I'll show a picture in a second, is a handheld device called the RUFit, and it's an FDA-approved device for measuring fine motor control, and it has several patents and academic publications from various medical testing in the US. The inventor is Dr. William Pask. And so, our main objective, keep in mind this was an exploratory study, but our initial study objective was to demonstrate that a physical measurement is possible which correlates to acupuncture protocol. And this would be the data that we interpret and receive is an objective method to demonstrate efficacy and effectiveness. And some of the hypotheses that we developed through the results and that we want to continue testing and investigating is variables associated with acupuncture effectiveness, such as time duration, needle placement, and is there an ideal time to measure the effects of acupuncture, such as immediately after, or are there effects that we're going to see after the patient leaves the clinic, and then later, is it possible to determine if a placebo effect is caused by the patient's belief? So we had two groups. One were acupuncture subjects, and then another group was basically a control. They didn't receive any type of therapeutic intervention, and we had both groups test before and after acupuncture, or there was a 40-minute window in which there was a gap between testing with the device. This device, as you can see, we hook it up to a computer or laptop, and there's a specific program that it analyzes all of the measurements and data that we get when they do the test. And the test, it registers not just the fine motor control, but the strength, the coordination variance with the fingers, and reaction time. So those are other measurements that we receive. The acupuncture methodology is from the Chinese traditional medicine, so Zangfu theory and channel meridian theory and differentiation. Maybe the next one we can look into some of the Japanese as well. and of course the stricter guidelines were abided by during this study. And so here's some basic information regarding the demographics of the people, the subjects that were involved. The average age was in the mid-40s. The males and females were a little separated, more females than males in the acupuncture group, and in the non-acupuncture group, there was more males than females. And so the total subjects that we report for the acupuncture group was 36, and then 17 for the non-acupuncture group. Keep in mind, in the acupuncture subject group, we tested both people that had pain conditions, mainly, but there were also some tests that were done with non-pain conditions. And this was included so we could see and test out if maybe coincidentally, just from doing acupuncture, is there an effect that it would have with the fine motor control? And so kind of taking into account maybe some possible placebo effect. You can see a list of the different pain conditions associated with stroke, sciatica. Some things were lower body, most of the conditions were upper body, and some of the non-pain conditions were irritable bowel syndrome, swelling of the ankles and wrists, anxiety, smoking cessation, etc. And so our data here shows measurements that were taken from both of the groups. Data in the graphs represent changes that were seen upon the first acupuncture treatment or the first time testing in the other group, and it's in relation to a % average change in the fine motor control. And so the statistical analysis shows that in the acupuncture group there is 66% positive change, 20% was negative, and then 17 there was no change. And then compare it to the non-acupuncture control group, and there was only 25% that showed a positive, and 37 negative, 37 there was no change. And so from the results we see from the non-acupuncture control group, we correlate that there's no intended effect that we see, that they're probably learning the test, and that's why there would be a positive change. The test is completely random, so that kind of helps us to account for a placebo effect, that they could just get improved measurements just from taking it over again. So that's what we tried to take into account. So data that we have here was presented from one case study that it yields some intriguing information and also a path for some of our future research questions and understanding the effectiveness of acupuncture's mechanisms. The case involves a 90-year-old patient with chronic osteoarthritis of the low back and comorbid chronic anxiety and depression. For years she received just conventional treatments, but had not provided sufficient alleviation of her ailments, so acupuncture was then sought out. When the patient began, treatment assistance was needed for her just to come into the clinic. She had at least one individual that helped her walk with her walker, and we all know that with the acupuncture dosage, this is really important. And in this case, her treatments were once a week for a few months, and then later it became every other week. Another thing that we wanted to investigate with these results are there residual or immediate effects of the acupuncture? I know it's hard to see on this one, but there's red dots, and that shows what was the measurements after acupuncture. And the blue dots are what was before. And if you look closely, you see that most of the points in the red are higher than the blue, so we saw some kind of effect that was happening after the acupuncture. But what's interesting though too is that if you look, sometimes the points for the following time that they visit are higher than when they left the previous time. And so that makes us curious as far as what's happening when they leave the clinic, because she wasn't taking herbal medicines, so we suspect that maybe there's residual and continuing effects of acupuncture after they leave. And then another is differences in the acupuncture point selection. For the first few treatments, up until the blue arrow at the top that says knees, I was using prone treatment acupuncture points, and then when that blue arrow with the knee comes, then that's when I switched. The chief complaint switched a little bit, and so I used supine and frontal acupuncture points. And what you notice is that the curve dips down a little bit, and so we wondered if maybe there's a difference that you would see in the different points based on the condition that the patient has. And the next blue arrow, where I wrote back, that's where I switched the treatment back to back shoe points and prone position. So that was very curious as well. And what's also interesting that we thought about and reflected was that some of the importance for having a standard evaluation with receiving objective data is that sometimes it's hard to assess what kind of changes, and if there are changes from the patient, because sometimes they don't even know themselves. And so with this patient, she had a moderate form of dementia, so we couldn't always assess and rely upon her treatment outcomes and what she discussed with us. And as we all know, acupuncture is not just for the physical body, but it also makes you happy. It helps the mental health. And in our understanding of physiology and pathology with acupuncture and Oriental medicine, we know that the mind and body are intertwined, and that it's an intervention of mind, body, spirit. And interesting enough, when this patient first started to come to me, within the first month, we saw a profound advancement in her physical mobility. But what her family reported to me was that there was a transformation in her mental health as well. And from some of my literature research that I did on this topic of geriatric pain, and also with mobility and mental health, the Netherlands study of depression and anxiety, interestingly enough, reported that results indicate from their study that if a patient has both chronic pain and chronic mental health conditions, such as anxiety, that the success of the treatment depends on if it addresses mind, body, spirit in the equation. And so it's maybe not coincidental that conventional treatments that she received were very limited in alleviation of her conditions. But with the acupuncture, we saw both differences with the mind and the body. And what I did, just from other best practices that are done in research, is I used a tool for the anxiety that's adopted by the American Psychology Association called the Geriatric Anxiety Scale. And what we see from the subscales, somatic, cognitive, affective, is that origins for her anxiety were not just from the physical realm, but also in the mental. So in the somatic realm, we saw that there was about a 47% change in her perception in that, and then the cognitive was 16.7, and the affective was 47.4. So this would indicate that acupuncture is an intervention of mind, body, and spirit. So our findings, we suggest that the values are distinct and significant between the different groups. Our t-test results were 007.007, and we have future hope to investigate more as we're seeing suggestive evidence of principles and theories of Chinese traditional medicine with residual, immediate effects of the acupuncture, dosage, differences, and measurements with the acupoint selection, the mind-body connection. And so the next steps and applications is one, which would be very interesting. As we know, especially in the US, there's a difference between the credentialing and practice with the education of acupuncture. And so is it possible to define certain variables of competency between the practitioners? We want to explore further fine motor control being a standard for evaluation of the efficacy and effectiveness of acupuncture. And of course, this will be something to promote more outcome-driven medicine, evidence-based medicine, and help bridge the gap between research and clinical practice to improve outcomes. And lastly, for some of the integrative medicine pain programs that I work for, we're thinking of extending the study to include some of the other therapeutic modalities in the program and see what kind of differences. And also, we're considering including the utilization of the neuronet or EEG to compare the effects of the brain activity and then what we're seeing in fine motor control. And this is it. I hope you enjoyed and learned a few things, and we can open it up for questions.
Thanks very much, Donald. I think time is limited, is 20 minutes, so it's better that we move to next speaker, and if we have time when we finish this session, if we still have time, we'll have some question time. Is that okay?
Yeah, very good. This is my contact information with my email and some of the places that I work, so feel free to contact me or even come visit Houston sometime.
Thank you again for your presentation. We will now welcome to the next speaker. Present.